It's my pleasure now to introduce Brenda Ireland. A couple of years ago, or a little less than a couple of years ago, we decided to invest $5 million of public money here in BC to create a blueprint or a strategy for Aboriginal tourism. And Brenda is the implementation manager for that Aboriginal tourism strategy. Brenda is an Anishinaabe transplant from Manitoba. She's been living here in Salish territory for 20 years. And as I say, she is the manager of the blueprint implementation and has been in that position since January of this year. She's been working for the last 7 years with First Nations communities and Aboriginal organizations, most recently with the Upper Statliam Language, Culture and Education Society in facilitating community-based tourism. Please welcome Brenda Ireland.
Thank you, Minister Bennett. My Anishinaabe name is Nino Cassie, which means hummingbird. And if you know me well, you will probably recognize that as being a very apt name, because I tend, or people comment on the level of energy I seem to bring to any project that I get involved with, and I seem to be all over the place. I want to first of all acknowledge the traditional territories of the Coast Salish people upon which we're gathered today. And I'd like to thank and acknowledge any of the elders or the leaders who have joined us today. And I'd like to thank and congratulate the organizers of this conference, and especially for the invitation to be part of this. Just to elaborate a little bit more on the blueprint, Mr. Bennett has already commented on the commitment and the funding that has been provided by the province. We are also funded by the federal government. And I want to also acknowledge the incredible support and guidance that has been provided by Tourism British Columbia, who, without their expertise and the professionalism, our path would have been a lot more difficult, and we would have stumbled a lot more times. So I raise my hands and say thank you to BC. The Blueprint strategy is a strategy designed to enhance and develop the Aboriginal tourism product in the province. So if BC is the enabler and TBC is the accelerator, then we are the facilitator when it comes to Aboriginal tourism. We work in 3 tiers. Tier 1 for those industries or those communities or entrepreneurs who just maybe thinking about tourism but are not too sure what exactly that means. So we provide awareness, training, anything that a potential operator may want to know about the tourism industry. We provide services in that area. Tier 2 is designed for those operators who are already out there doing incredible work but are not market ready. So we provide them with the kind of services that they need to ensure that they do become market ready. Tier 3 are for those operators, and we have 37 of them in our co-op right now, who are market ready, and we provide marketing services nationally, internationally for those operators. What I want to speak of today is one of the things that, or several, we're doing very, very many things. I encourage you to check out our website around tourism and Aboriginal tourism in the province. But one of the things that we're very, very proud of is the relationship that we have built with the people who sit on this table around sustainable tourism. And I want to talk about sustainable Aboriginal tourism and linking those traditional approaches and values that we have as Indigenous people to the current global and environmental reality. I want to acknowledge the work of Maren Smith from Forest Ethics, Art Sterritt from the Coastal First Nations, and Patrick Armstrong from Moresby Consulting, whose paper, From Conflict to Collaboration, The Story of the Great Bear Rainforest, which is informed and in fact is almost directly taken from that paper. I just want to give you a little bit of background. The Great Bear Rainforest is a temperate rainforest located on Canada's Pacific coast. Its area represents 1/4 of the world's remaining coastal temperate forest and is part of the largest intact rainforest left on the planet. It extends from mid-coast to the BC-Alaska border and includes Haida Gwaii, and the area is 74,000 square kilometers in size. Trees up to 1,000 years old tower over the 100 large valleys and hundreds of smaller ones. The water system supports 20% of the world's wild salmon stock. an ecological treasure, the forest, estuaries, inlets, and islands support tremendous and unique biological diversities. Bears, grizzly, black, the white commoded, wolves, millions of migrating birds, and unique botanical species. First Nations comprise of the majority of the population, many living in small, isolated communities accessible only by air or water. In times past, the First Nations carefully managed the land and sea resources, having absolute power to govern and establish institutions, develop and enforce laws, decide citizenship, and manage land and resources. In modern times, newcomers came to log the Great Bear Rainforest and fish the abundant salmon. At the same time, laws were enacted to limit the coastal First Nations' right and ability to participate in that economy. The result has been extensive economic, social, and cultural damage for the First Nations who have inhabited and managed the land for thousands of years. In spite of all of the economic activity swirling around them, the coastal First Nations maintained their Aboriginal titles and right to their traditional territories. The 1980s and 1990s were an era of conflict in the woods. I think we all remember those. Haida elders led the way to protecting territory from logging on Lyle Island. Civic unrest to protect dwindling old-growth forest spread and culminated in the arrest of 900 people at Clackwack Sound in 1993. With increasing pressure by environmental groups who educated the international market about the unsustainable forest practices that were deemed at that time in BC and consumer demand for ecologically harvested wood projects, a shift in attitudes about eco-management occurred. At the same time, Supreme Court of Canada decisions were affirming Aboriginal title rights and instructed provincial governments to adequately consult and compensate First Nations for forestry activity in the traditional territories. The planets were aligning. The time had arrived for First Nations, government, environment, and forest industry representatives to come together to resolve environmental as well as economic, social, and title and rights issues. First Nations community, which had for years worked in isolation, came together in 2000 to discuss shared challenges of high unemployment, lack of economic opportunities, and lack of access to resources. From the beginning, the First Nations goal was to restore and implement responsible land, water, and resource management on the central and north coast of BC and Haida Gwaii that are ecologically, socially, and environmentally sustainable. First Nations wanted to promote economic development on the coast while at the same time protecting the environment and the quality of life for those who live there. The Coastal First Nations Alliance goal is to restore and implement ecologically, social, and economically sustainable resource management approaches on the central north coast and Haida Gwaii. Smith and Sterrett point out that there are many stories related to the development of the Great Bear Rainforest conservation areas, and kudos to the province for taking such an incredible lead in ensuring the protection of this area. All of these stories have lessons to be shared. Challenges and solutions, best practices have been identified. All of the stories, whether told from the perspective of the environmental groups, industry, or government, representatives are all valuable. As Aboriginal Tourism BC implements its blueprint strategy for tourism, and in particular, the Sustainable Aboriginal Tourism Training Initiatives, we're looking for stories that will showcase the development of best practices that First Nations communities created to resolve complex social, economic, cultural, and environmental issues. And the Coastal First Nations is one such group. BC will partner with the Coastal First Nations to tell the Great Bear Rain story from the unique perspective of those communities. The goal is to identify procedures, policies, best practices that other First Nations communities can use in creating multi-interest partnerships to address specific challenges and issues. In addition, the Coastal First Nations and BC will conduct an inventory of tourism-related businesses currently operating or being developed in the Great Bear Rainforest conservation areas. BC's goal is to develop Aboriginal sustainable tourism guidelines based not only on the Partnership for Global Sustainable Tourism criteria, but also, and more importantly, on the traditions, values, and expectations of Indigenous peoples. These guidelines will serve as a template or checklist for communities engaging in sustainable tourism development in the age of climate change. BC looks forward to working with the Coastal First Nations and other First Nations communities and Aboriginal organizations in developing these guidelines, templates, and checklists. These materials will inform the development of BC's Sustainable Aboriginal Tourism Training Initiative, which will be rolled out in February 2009. Thank you very much.